2891 Deathless Spirit. A giant slowly rose from beneath the dunes, erasing them. As rivers of white sand flowed down from his rising figure, his shape and appearance were slowly revealed. The being who had changed the underlying currents of the world with his mere presence resembled a human, a skeleton of a human, at least. He towered above the desert like a terrifying monument, a tattered robe of fluttering ivory fabric obscuring his ancient bones. Those of the bones that were in sight were black, like the bones of other deathless, but also different. That was because they were inlaid with strips of pure gold, which framed his cheekbones, empty eye sockets, and rose above his skull like a crown. In his hand, the giant was holding a white staff, one that might have been carved from the trunk of a sacred tree, or perhaps fashioned out of the spine of an enormous serpent. At the top of the staff, a clear crystal was emanating pure white light, set in gold. The moment the heavy gaze of the giant skeleton fell on Sunny and the Shadow Legion, he felt as if something pressed him into the ground. A few of the severely damaged shades simply collapsed, vanquished by the mere weight of that gaze. Damnation! Sunny stared at the deathless spirit, momentarily frozen by the oppressive power of the fallen deity's presence. Azarax was staring at the enormous skeleton, as well, his jaw set grimly. A moment later, he opened it and said, It's him, the Wandering Archon." Sunny finally composed himself. What are his powers? What concept does he command? Azarax remained silent. Answer me, damn it. Finally, the ancient tyrant turned to look at one of Sunny's incarnations. Strangely enough, it seemed like his usual confidence was gone. He spoke in a distant tone. I don't remember. Why don't I remember? Then, his empty eye sockets were suddenly full of anger. Who cares what powers he wields? It's a damn spirit, Shadow. Even if he lost his aspect, his will alone is enough to be a problem. Sunny Winston studied the battlefield. That's true. With the arrival of the Wandering Archon, the fragile balance on the battlefield was broken. His tidal will was like a guiding force that subjugated the collective will of the Deathless, not intentionally, but simply by virtue of being so overpowering. It was a single source of intent that gave shape to the tumultuous vastness of their murderous determination. As a result, the cracks Sunny and Nephis used to resist the Deathless horde were gone. Their will could not overcome the enemies anymore, and so, the world was being bent and twisted against them. The Deathless grew stronger, faster, and more durable. The silent warriors of the Shadow Legion and the undead warriors following Azarax, meanwhile, grew slower and weaker. Their weapons missed more often, the sands shifted beneath their feet, and the blows raining down at them found their marks with greater ease. Sunny's expression turned grim. They had to deal with that sacred skeleton. But that was easier said than done. Sunny was wary of cursed beings, but he was not particularly wary of the Wandering Archon. That was because it was the unnatural powers that made nightmare creatures of the cursed rank, the dark gods of the dream realm, so dangerous. The Deathless only had a tenuous grasp on their powers, at best, so a Deathless champion of the sacred rank was not as frightening. All he possessed was raw power and the terrifying immensity of his will. However, Sunny and Nephis were both supreme titans, and had Azarax as an ally as well. By all accounts, the three of them should have been enough to slay a cursed one or two, especially if those cursed ones were mere beasts. However, the Deathless could not be killed, and therein lay the problem. They could not slay the Wandering Archon, so they had to dismantle him bone by bone. And completely obliterating a sacred being was far more difficult than simply killing them. Looking at the towering figure of the Deathless spirit, Sunny made a tentative prediction that if the three of them, Nephis, Azarax, and himself, joined forces and poured everything they had into the battle, they would be able to destroy the terrifying creature before it destroyed them. The problem, though, was that the Wandering Archon was not alone. There was still a great horde of deathless warriors around them, and these undead horrors would not stay still while the champions of the invading army assaulted their god. If all three of them focused on battling the sacred prisoner of Ariel's hell, the Deathless would swiftly overwhelm their army and attack them from the rear, making an already deadly clash simply impossible to win. So, that meant that instead of destroying the Wandering Archon, someone would have to stall it until dawn. "I'll take him on, Shadow." Azarax seemed to have regained his previously indomitable confidence and was now looking at the Deathless spirit with a dark anticipation. In truth, he had probably never been rattled by the appearance of this powerful foe. Rather, what had robbed the undead tyrant of his confidence was the fact that he could not quite remember who the Wandering Archon was. That was perhaps the first time he realized that there was something wrong going on with his mind. Something wrong with it apart from the damage caused by spending thousands of years nailed to a tree, that was. Sunny gave him a dark look. You will do no such thing. Azarax was powerful, powerful beyond compare, even having been made so by countless years of bloodshed. However, that power of his would be of little use against an enemy that could not be destroyed and could only be contained for a time. His aspect was that of a conquering warlord, not a brawler. Apart from that, if Sunny was honest with himself, he would have had to admit that he was alarmed by the implausible notion that Azarax could actually win that fight. In the unlikely event that he did, there would possibly be a sacred vassal following him around. And that was not something Sunny wanted to see, tempting as it was. That only left him and Nephis, then. Sunny. She was already near them, having advanced from the rear of the battle formation. Sunny turned to her, and for a brief moment, they looked into each other's eyes. That brief moment was enough for them to have an entire mental conversation without saying a word, though. Nephis was willing to take on the wandering Archon. She was eager, even, wanting to prove to the world, and perhaps to herself, as well, that she was still Nephis of the Immortal Flame clan, that she was Changing Star, with or without her longing domain. However, Sun Yu did not think that she was the right choice for this particular trial, either. Both of them were badly matched against the Deathless Spirit, and against the Deathless in general. Neph's powers lay in controlling flames and summoning destruction upon her enemies, but the undead warriors did not burn easily. So, destroying them took her a lot more effort than usual. Nephis had incredible staying power due to her ability to heal herself, true, which meant that out of the three of them, she could last the longest. And yet, the number of tools she could use against the wandering Archon was quite limited. Sunny, on the other hand, he was nothing if not versatile. Nephis excelled in healing and destruction, but he had all kinds of tricks up his sleeve. So, for a task that involved containing a powerful enemy, without being able to obliterate him, he was the best choice. His domain was just as robust as it had been before, too, so he would not have to fight a sacred being in a weakened state, like Nephis would. Letting out a sigh, Sunny looked away. I'll stall the Archon. I'm the best equipped to handle a battle like that, and possess the strongest domain among us three at the moment. You two continue pushing forward. Nephis, take my place in the formation. My shadows will support you, so clear a path forward. Azarax, you do what you do. Get as far away from that thing as possible, as fast as you can. I'll buy you some time and rejoin you before dawn. If he survived, the undead tyrant stared at him solemnly. It seemed like he was regarding Sunny with something that resembled emotion for the first time. Eventually, he looked away and said, "And what are we supposed to do if a second spirit rises from the sand?" Sunny blinked a couple of times. Did he just? He clenched his fists. Hey, Fossil, I am going to tear your damn jaw off. Can you stop running your mouth, fool? Shaking his head, Sunny headed in the direction where the wandering Archon was already taking heavy steps, walking towards them. If a second spirit shows up, deal with it. Smack it with your damn axe, why don't you? Better yet, smash him with your skull. There doesn't seem to be anything inside it, anyway. Azarax laughed. Look, now, you are finally starting to resemble a real supreme. Sunny cursed at him. That damn bastard. I am going to come back and kill him right after I kill Uriz. He gave Saint an order to assume command of the Shadow Legion, and commanded his shades to follow Saint. By then, Nephis was already descending upon the Deathless in a whirlwind of white flame. Azarax dashed forward to rejoin the fight, his heavy axe crushing bones with each blow. Now, it was up to Sunny to make sure that they would not have to deal with the Deathless Spirit. This is probably going to hurt. He called upon the wolf. 2892 Big Bad Wolf. What was the best way to fight a sacred enemy? Of course, it was to be sacred yourself. Sadly, Sunny was not a spirit yet. However, he did command 4 sacred shades: Puppeteer, Abundance, the Rat King, and the Wolf. The Puppeteer Moth was technically the most powerful of them, being a tyrant. However, its powers did not lend themselves well to direct confrontation, or rather, not as well as those of the other sacred shades. That was the very reason why Sunny had managed to defeat the Spirit of Doubt and was alive today. Abundance and the Rat King each excelled at many things, but facing a single overwhelmingly powerful adversary was not one of them. The wolf, however, the wolf had been a spirit of primal fury, cunning, and hunting. It personified the concept of the wolf, and wolves were exceptional hunters. They were known to bring down prey much larger than themselves, as well. Apart from that, the wolf had been a cursed demon, a being of a higher class than both Abundance and the Rat King. So, it was Sunny's best choice to battle the wandering Archon. The problem, of course, was that despite being sacred, the wolf was a sacred shade. And shades did not quite possess a will of their own, and even if sacred shades were somewhat different, they still could not compare to real spirits. The shadow of the will they could exert was far less potent than that of living beings, sacred or cursed. There was a cure for that, though, a partial cure, but a cure nonetheless. As the wolf launched itself into the horde of the deathless, barreling toward the distant figure of the wandering Archon, it was surrounded by all 7 of Sunny's incarnations. And then, all 7 avatars turned into shadows, wrapping themselves around the shadow of the primeval predator. 1, 2, 3, 4, 7. With each shadow, the power of the wolf increased. More than that, it became a direct conduit of Sunny's own will. That will was supreme, not sacred, but it was the will of a titan. It was empowered by Spirit Weave, as well. And when it was being channeled by a sacred shade, the result was truly fearsome, not quite as fearsome as having a true sacred being attack the enemy, but still terrifying nonetheless. As Sunny wrapped himself around the wolf, he fused with it on a deep level. As always, he was instantly overwhelmed by the vastness and unfathomable depth of a sacred being's consciousness. It was so overwhelming, in fact, that Sunny could not contend with all of it. Instead, he had to limit his perception to a narrow band, only focusing on what was important. All around him, the will of the wandering Archon churned and flowed, drowning the world. If there was one silver lining in all of it, though, it was that even if expressing their will seemed as natural as breathing for the spirits, the deathless did not possess enough of themselves to wield it with a fine level of precision. Sunny, however, knew how to wield his. Even if the natural affinity of his will, death, was meaningless in a battle against the deathless, the fact that he was adept at wielding his will like he would a weapon gave him an advantage. The wolf flew through the horde of undead warriors, followed by his pack. Some of the shadow wolves were brought down and vanquished in that mad dash, but most made it through the mass of deathless by following the leader of their pack. The wandering Archon was already near. It's good to learn. The deathless spirit raised his staff and brought it down. It seemed to fall slowly, and looked too far away to hit Sunny, but the space itself was torn apart and twisted by that unhurried blow, and a split second later, the wolf was only a single moment away from being erased from existence, as if it had never existed at all. That not knowing death means not knowing salvation. Sunny pulled the sacred shade into the shadows, stepping through them to appear behind the deathless spirit. Ignoring the laws of space. 2 could play that game. Not knowing death means that one's suffering will never end. I would have loved to teach this bastard a harsh lesson about unending agony. The wolf lunged into the air, aiming to sink its fangs into the enemy's throat. Sadly, the Archon was suddenly facing them, the horrifying gaze of his empty eye sockets pressing Sunny into the ground. But no, they weren't empty. 2 golden discs were set into the eye socket, like enormous gold coins. An eerie radiance was spilling from behind those discs. But something tells me that the deathless know that better than I ever would. Instead of the towering skeleton's spine, the wolf could only bite into his arm. The shadow of the primordial beast pressed down onto the sleeve of the ivory robe, aiming to crush the black bone beneath. It pulled the Archon down, jerking its head sideways with terrible force to tear the entire forearm off. At the same time, 2 wills, the elemental will of the deathless spirit and Sunny's sharp, deadly one, clashed with each other, sending an invisible, imperceptible, inconceivable shockwave spreading through the fabric of the world. They were competing to see which one of them would get to lure the universal laws of existence to their side. Come on, come on. In the end, the bones of the wandering Archon did not shatter. The obsidian fangs of the wolf cracked, instead. In the next moment, the deathless spirit calmly brought his staff down on the enormous beast's back. The blow fell on the spine of the wolf with the weight of an entire realm, almost managing to snap it in half. The wolf survived the attack by releasing the enemy and allowing the force of the impact to throw it down, rolling over the dunes in a whirlwind of white sand. A few moments later, it was already on its feet. The wolf was ready to continue the fight, a terrifying growl escaping from its maw. Sunny was in a sea of pain. Because the moment the Archon struck his shade with the staff, a net of cracks spread across one of his CORs, as well. He suppressed a tortured groan. Yup, it hurts a lot. 2893 Empty Deity. The deathless spirit towered above the shadow of the wolf, and in the darkness of the night, he seemed like a black mountain that obscured the distant, radiant ocean of stars. He might not have been stronger than the sacred shade, but his will was far superior. Sunny was not even sure that calling it superior would be the right word. The difference between his own will and that of the Archon was like the difference between a clear brook and a vast sea. Like the difference between a stone fortress and the boundless expanse of the wide world that surrounded it. The Archon did not possess a weakness that Sunny could easily exploit, either. In the battle against Abundance, Sunny had been able to lock it in space and slowly poison the enormous Godworm with his death will, but the Archon was deathless. In the battle against the Rat King, Sunny had been able to destroy the single rat that was the source of the terrifying swarm, thus cutting its connection to the puppeteer, and watch the rats devour each other to satiate their maddening hunger. But there was no single weak spot that could be used to destroy the Archon, and no one was in control of him. In the battle against the wolf, Sunny had been able to grasp the concept wielded by the enemy and personify its opposite. That allowed him to hold out long enough to use the cursed demon's own terrifying power to fuel the grand spell he had woven in advance, thus destroying it. But there was no spell that could help Sunny against the Archon. And the Archon did not seem to wield any concept, either. Or rather, it did, but it was of no help to Sunny. After exchanging the first blows with the Deathless Spirit, Sunny had gotten a better taste of his will. And what he found was that the ancient horror seemed similar to Azarax, the Plague of Steel, in some regard. There was almost nothing common between them, except for one thing that mattered most. Azarax was supreme, and therefore, his will had an innate affinity, just like Sunny's will was innately tied to death, while Nef's was connected to desire and longing. What of the Plague of Steel, then? What affinity did his will possess? What concept did he personify, or at least would grow to personify if he ever underwent apotheosis? Sunny had racked his brain about it for a while, observing the ancient tyrant closely in the ferocious battles they fought. The answer he eventually arrived at was, needless to say, quite surprising. The Deathless Sovereign's will expressed only one concept, and that concept was, himself. The natural affinity of Azarax, the Plague of Steel, was to nothing more and nothing less than Azarax himself. Perhaps he was too arrogant and full of deadly ambition to tie the concept of himself to any greater force. After all, as far as Azarax was concerned, there was no force and no element that was greater than him. In the end, all of existence, including all the elements and forces contained within it, was meant to submit and bow down before him. The Ag Chan was very similar, albeit for a different reason. The Deathless Spirit was not overcome by an insatiable lust for conquest, but whatever it had been, whatever concept he had personified, whatever kind of apotheosis he had undergone was washed away by the curse of Shadow God and the merciless passage of years. Now, he was an empty, fallen deity that personified nothing but himself. Whatever made him the wandering Archon had been erased and swallowed by oblivion, and so, he wielded no power but the power of godhood itself, the power to reshape the world according to his will. On one hand, it was a great relief. After all, Sunny still remembered his terrifying experiences in Ariel's game, especially the days that were mysteriously missing from his memory, the days of the battle against the eerie snow demon that had infected their minds. He also remembered the cursed demon Abjuration, which had come close to wiping out all of humanity during its battle against Nephis. So, it was a boon that the Archon did not remember how to wield his powers, whatever those powers might have been. At the same time, it put Sunny at a disadvantage, because there was no concept for him to counteract or channel the opposite of. There was nothing for him to exploit, and so, all he could do was try to match the Deathless Spirit in a contest of brute force. Luckily, the wolf was not helpless in the fight against an overwhelmingly strong enemy. Yes, the Archon was far greater than it, towering above the giant beast like a dark mountain, but the Archon had been a human once, or at least a creature that resembled humans. And there were very few things humans feared more than a predator stalking them in the night. After that first clash, where the wolf received a devastating blow, it changed tactics, channeling all the cunning and ferociousness of a primeval beast. At the same time, having become one with the wolf, Sunny reshaped himself in the image of a wolf and sharpened his will for a focused, singular purpose. That purpose was to force a concept upon the hollow deity of Ariel's hell, on the spirit who had been the wandering Archon once. The concept of prey. When the Deathless Spirit and the wolf clashed for the second time, the world rippled and twisted like a piece of crumpled paper. The nightmare desert shook. The wolf did not manage to bring down the Archon, but this time, it managed to escape unscathed, if only just barely. A split second later, it was already moving through the shadows, ready to attack the enemy again. Time was flowing, and the Deathless Spirit was focusing on the wolf instead of turning his attention to the Shadow Legion. So, even if Sunny was in pain after enduring a heavy blow to his soul, he was accomplishing his mission. Out there on the battlefield, the Shadow Legion and the undead warriors serving Azarax were making their way forward. However, their pace had slowed down to a crawl, and they were suffering casualties at a far greater rate than before. After all, Sunny's absence could not be ignored. Not only had he acted as not one, but 7 deadliest champions of the invading army, splitting the tide of the Deathless before they could reach the battle formation, but he was also the commander of the Shadow Legion. Now that he had to pour all of his attention into the battle against the Archon, his shades could only follow Saint. And Saint, despite her War Master attribute, was yet incomplete. She was a mere devil, after all, so her ability to lead armies was going to remain rudimentary for as long as she did not rise to the class of tyrant. Added to that was the fact that the Deathless Spirit's will was still fueling the undead prisoners of the Nightmare Desert with indomitable resolve. The world itself was playing favorites, assisting the Deathless while obstructing their enemies. Nephis was not there to heal and mend the wounded shades anymore, either, since she was fighting on the front line. So, the invading army was suffering. The shades were being slowly whittled down and vanquished. Even the undead warriors of Azarax were starting to be destroyed. Just like Sunny and Nephis had dismantled and obliterated the Deathless before, the Deathless were not dismantling the turncoats. The curse of Shadow God would probably restore them, eventually, but not nearly fast enough to be of use for the expedition to the tomb of Ariel. Azarax seemed to have pushed himself even further than before, rampaging among the enemy like a spirit of inevitability and destruction. However, even his terrifying strength was not enough to turn the tide of this losing battle. Nephis had to get involved and fill the great chasm left by Sunny's absence, somehow, even if she possessed only 1 body, not 7, and could not control the Shadow Legion at all. So, that was what she did. At first, she simply summoned the blessing and entered the melee, serving as the spearhead of the slowly advancing formation. Her sublime swordsmanship revealed itself in all its glory, and as flashes of brilliant white light illuminated the dark mass of the charging Deathless, her lithe figure could be seen moving between them, cutting one after another down. But, of course, that was not enough. Even channeling her flames through the blessing to unleash incinerating rays of pure light was not enough, since the Deathless were too numerous and too powerful, resisting the devastating power of her burning soul with daunting efficiency. Having dismantled another skeleton and crushed its skull under her foot, Nephis stopped for a moment and looked over the endless horde of the Deathless, her gaze turning cold. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat and exhaled slowly. When she opened her eyes again, they were full of immolating white flame. A soft white radiance ignited under her skin. Then, it grew brilliant and blinding, until there was nothing soft about it, and as Neph's tunic collapsed into a whirlwind of white sparks, she assumed the form of the Spirit of Light, of a being whose body was woven out of pure radiance and flame, not mortal flesh. When she did, the night of Ariel's hell did not seem so dark anymore. That radiant form, however, was not Neph's true and full transformation. It was merely a shell that contained the boundless ocean of her soul flame in a radiant vessel. And now, Nephis chose to open that vessel, unleashing herself upon the world. 2894 Ocean of Flame. Suddenly, the darkness retreated, and a titanic, billowing pillar of roaring white flame escaped into the vastness of the sky, washing over it like an immolating flood. The fire churned, and if one glanced closely, they could glimpse a vague, flowing silhouette of something colossal being drawn by the moving flames, appearing and disappearing in the dance of fire, before they were blinded by its pure radiance, of course. As if the flame was a living thing that moved with purpose and otherworldly intent. Right now, its intent was to devour the Deathless. The boundless ocean of flame descended upon Ariel's hell like a white inferno, swallowing a vast swath of the undead horde in front of the advancing army. The desert was drowned by the sea of fire, which stretched all the way to the horizon. Countless Deathless were trapped in the inferno, burning in it, being gnawed on and shattered by it. Their figures were like black candlesticks melting in the light. The visage of Changing Star, unleashed, was both radiant and terrifying. Sadly, even her true shape was not powerful and devastating enough to wipe out the prisoners of hell, especially now that her domain had been broken, and her will had lost the weight of billions of souls that used to empower it. The weaker of the Deathless were destroyed, and those of them on whom Nephis focused her incinerating will were being slowly turned to ash. But most of them, while damaged and burned by the flame, continued to move. Some, those who were powerful enough, fought against the living flame, dealing it invisible wounds. Nephis healed those wounds and endured the agony, scorching them in turn. The rest waded through the ocean of flame, blinded, still overcome by the desire to obliterate the invaders who had dared to enter Ariel's hell. Their black bones slowly ignited like embers and then turned incandescent, shining with an angry red glow in the sea of fire. It was then that Saint, whose fearsome armor and jade body were all but impervious to elemental attacks, emerged from the flame and slashed the nearest Deathless with her black blade. The adamantine bones, which had been nearly indestructible before, parted in front of the dark sword like butter. That was because even if they were not destroyed by the soul flame, they were rendered softer and far more fragile in their incandescent state. Saint did not stop even for a split second, instantly dismantling the Deathless warrior before moving on to the next one with measured, indomitable steps. Behind her, the figure of Azarax emerged from the flame, as well. The ancient tyrant laughed, his glass armor shining like a terrifying beacon. His axe fell, splitting a deathless beast in half, and his boots stomped the fallen creature into dust, a swarm of red embers shooting to swirl in the overheated air. Luckily, neither the undead vassals of the ancient conqueror nor the shades needed to breathe. Otherwise, their lungs would have turned to ash already. The rest of the invading army moved behind its champions. The white flames flowed, opening a path to them. A few seconds later, the two forces clashed, and this time, the Deathless fell far more easily under the blades, claws, and fangs of the invaders. The Shadow Legion marched on through the white flame, which parted in front of it like an immolating sea. It seemed to be working, for now. But even in the depths of her agony, Nephis knew that she would not be able to maintain that fearsome assault for long. That was because she had lost most of her domain, and therefore, the vast torrent of spirit essence that used to flow into her soul was replaced by a thin stream. She was burning more essence than she was receiving, and even with the fire empowering her soul, she would exhaust her reserves of it soon. Before that happened, they needed to leave the Deathless spirit and the vast expanse of his insurmountable will behind. Far away, engaged in a ferocious battle with the Deathless spirit, Sunny could only vaguely see Nephis and the Shadow Legion advancing in the distance. The nightmare desert was illuminated by her radiant flames, and dark figures clashed in the sea of white radiance, indistinguishable from each other. His shadow sense was going haywire from all the chaos and mayhem of the cataclysmic battle, so he was having trouble determining which figures were friends, and which ones were foes. Their army was advancing at a good rate, though, so it seemed that Nephis and Azarax had a handle on the situation for now, at least. At first, the Shadow Legion was behind him. Then, it was far to the side, circling around the area where Sunny and the Archon fought. And then, it was finally ahead of them, slowly making its way closer to the looming shape of the tomb of Ariel. There was not enough distance between the Shadow Legion and the Deathless spirit yet, though, and there wouldn't be for a long time. So, Sunny had to continue fighting. It was tough. The Archon was a terrifying enemy, an enemy that Sunny had no business fighting, really, and even if the wolf was cunning and elusive, attacking from the darkness only to retreat moments later, aided in its predatory dance by Sunny carrying its weight through the shadows, the damage they had received was slowly accumulating. The giant figure of the wolf was frayed now, surrounded by a billowing cloud of gray smoke. Sunny, meanwhile, was in the throes of agony, several of his soul cores already covered in cracks. Every time the wolf was a little bit too slow to evade the Archon's attack, his entire being shook and quaked, barely surviving the terrifying tyranny of the fallen deity's unfathomable killing intent. Sunny could endure a lot of punishment, but there was a limit even to his endurance. For now, Soul Weave was preventing his wounded soul from collapsing and his course from crumbling, but if the battle continued in the same manner, he would suffer a loss or even be outright destroyed. Unfortunately, the battle had to go on. He had occupied the Deathless spirit for some time now, minutes, perhaps even dozens of minutes, but dawn was still hours away. Which meant that Sunny had to continue fighting against an undying god of hell for hours more, and he was not sure that he could manage that. Think. The wolf clawed at the looming figure of the Archon, adding more rifts to his tattered robe. It bit onto the white staff of the Deathless spirit, leaving deep grooves in it and ripping one of the golden ornaments free. It leapt into the air and sank its fangs into the giant skeleton's jaw, dislodging it from the joints. Now, the Archon's jaw hung crooked, which only made him look more terrifying. The eerie glow emanating from behind the golden coins covering his eyes grew more intense, and Sunny felt something cold grasp his heart. The Archon twisted space and time, answering to the ferocious attack. Sunny felt a ghastly pain first, and only then felt the Deathless spirit's bony fingers rending through the wolf's hide, leaving a ghastly wound on its side. And on Sunny's soul, as well. I don't think I am going to survive until dawn. Even if he used the chain enchantment of the curse, it would only buy him a little bit more time. His mind spun furiously, trying to come up with something, some trick, some devious scheme, or even some bold gamble, to turn the tide of this brutal battle. Was there some application of his aspect abilities that he could use, some revelation he was failing to grasp, some memory he could summon to turn the tables? Memories. He remembered every memory in his soul arsenal, and every enchantment those memories possessed. He also remembered every instance of using those enchantments and what the results were. Sunny had created most of those memories himself, so he knew what they were capable of very well. That was why he knew that there was no memory that could truly help him defeat a sacred being, not really. That was because memories did not usually possess a will of their own, and were therefore only as powerful as the will of their masters. In the battles between beings of lesser ranks, that did not matter that much, but when one fought against a deity, any memory could be easily rendered ineffectual simply by being denied the power to reshape the world in accordance with its design. So, even if Sunny had forged a sacred memory for himself, it would still be fueled by his supreme will. Unless there was an adversarial will opposing him, it could still work just fine, if it was designed well enough to push against the universal laws of existence, but if Sunny had to fight someone like the Wandering Archon, even his most powerful memories would probably prove to be unreliable. Forged myself, a sacred memory. The wolf received another blow and was thrown into the air, collapsing on the sand with a terrifying impact moments later. Sunny let out an anguished groan and focused on the deathless spirit. Suddenly, a completely mad idea found its way into his mind. Sunny had been known to entertain an outlandish idea or two, but this one was really, truly mad, even by his standards. But is there a reason why it shouldn't work? Actually, there were a million reasons, but Sunny did not need those. He only needed one reason why it could work. His will would do the rest and make the remotely possible become inevitable. Hopefully. In any case, he knew that he was not going to last long against the Archon, and this was the only plausible, albeit deeply mad, idea he had been able to come up with. Let's try it, then. What's the worst? No, I'm not finishing that sentence. As the wolf staggered to its feet and glared at the deathless spirit, baring its fangs, Sunny secretly allowed one of his incarnations to separate itself from the sacred shade. He hid in the darkness, watching intently, and when the wolf lunged forward to attack the Archon again, quietly assumed a human form once more. Looking around in hesitation, Sunny took a deep breath and reached into his soul sea. He needed to retrieve something from there, as well as summon a particular memory. The shadows flowed up his body and extended from his torso, turning into 2 additional pairs of hands. If brute force doesn't work, try sorcery. He summoned Weaver's Needle.